Well, this is Tom Tresser from the Civic Lab and the TIF Illumination Project, chatting with some graduate students from the University of Chicago. I believe the class is called Leading with Innovation. And as Eric has explained, this group of students has been partnered with the Chief Equity Officer of the City of Chicago to explore the topic of TIFs. And if I'm hearing you right, the question is, can it be democratized or improved in some way? Okay, that being setting the table, fire away.
So Tom, we're really in the investigative process of how TIFs have been run in Chicago, how community organizations view them, how the public view them. So I'm going to ask some open-ended questions if that's okay. So for one, we're working on a project to see if there's a way to connect community organizations to resources. And by that, I mean, we've been hearing that smaller organizations view the TIF application as this daunting, complex process. A lot of the small organizations don't have resources, right? They don't have the manpower, et cetera. So we're trying to think of ways to connect community orgs to people or experts with TIFs, so to hopefully encourage them or help them obtain TIF funding for a project that they want to work on. So we've heard a lot of stuff. I'm curious to hear in your from your perspective or experience, how do you see TIFs helping community organizations, broadly speaking? Like, do you see that there's a way to do it, or just kind of curious to hear your general thoughts?
Well, by way of background, I can tell you that the TIF Illumination Project has been in the field since 2013. We use data mining, graphics, maps, and old school community organizing to explain TIFs and really the larger issue of civic finances. TIFs are only a part of the pie of let's call it public money. And of course, we're talking about property taxes, which is a big part of the revenue picture for Chicago. But of course, there's much more that goes into funding a city like Chicago, whose overall budget is over $20 billion. But this is a big piece of the puzzle, and it's very controversial. So we've been in the field, as I say, since 2013. We've done over 186 public meetings. We've been invited to virtually every community in the city of Chicago, and we're working with activists in 13 other cities right now over the issues of economic justice, centering on TIFs, because TIFs are in 49 states. Mm-hmm. So the question that you're asking is not just like a Chicago question, but it is a national civil rights question, we feel. And I would further say it's framed inside an even larger question of what you might call the 1% versus the 99%, going all the way back to Occupy Wall Street, and the larger questions of defunding the police, Black Lives Matter, related issues of structural racism in America and Chicago, in which you have to place every project, every piece of public policy, not just TIFs. TIFs are just one thing, right, created by the city. But you have to remember where we are in the city of Chicago. And I sometimes fear that students, especially those from the University of Chicago, are not given the proper background. And you just run into these policy questions, as you just have, without the proper context. So, just to set the stage again, we are social justice activists at the Civic Lab. We're not academics studying things for fun and just to publish a paper. We are a do tank. And our bias is towards racial justice. And we use the lens of what is called The Cycle of Liberation by Bobby Harrow. So if you haven't run into the cycle of liberation, we recommend you to take a look at that as a sort of a pedagogical platform to stand on in order to inform your studies.
Mhm.
We remind you that Chicago is the most corrupt city in America, in case you didn't know that. And that the current city, the current politics, the current context, including the appointment of a chief equity officer, has to be taken with a bit of a grain of salt, if you will, to challenge and to enter into these conversations fully armed and not just accept the frame that you're given. Okay, so we sort of stand out in this way when we look at policy. So if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
So that being said, we find TIFs to be racist and corrupting. And so we reject the frame, the narrative of how can community organizations use TIFs to advance themselves? Because that's like saying, how can we use slavery to advance economic justice? Is there a way to have slavery that would be palatable?
Mm.
So that may be a controversial statement, and you can certainly challenge me and challenge our research, but we have the data to back it up. Okay, so that's where we're coming from after 9 years in the field and talking to activists in multiple cities across the country. So to answer your question, no. TIFs cannot be democratized, and they will not help community groups. If they think they can, they are being bamboozled. And this is an old Chicago ploy. Again, this is the context of the city of Chicago. You have to understand that the power structures play us off against one another and promise us crumbs from the master's table. So it is true that you might, as a community organization, and I don't know what community organization you might think about, whether it's a housing organization on the north side, or I don't know, somebody working with homeless people on the south side. You know, there's hundreds of groups out there. Yes, they might be given TIF money, but then they're going to be forced to defend a racist program. And so we've seen this over the years, in which essentially the mayor, in this case it's Mayor Lightfoot, but before her it was Emmanuel, before him Mayor Daley II, distributing small amounts of money to churches and community groups, so they would stand with the mayor, you know, in other context situations when they were wrong. So I can stop there, but before we go any further, I wanted to ask this group: do you understand how TIFs work? I mean, I think that's also pretty critical to our shared dialogue here.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, we're currently in the process of learning from organizations what TIFs are. So we do have a broad understanding of the TIF process, but the more complex stuff like which committee it jumps to, and you know, all those sort of specific steps, those are more fuzzy.
Okay, well, let's stop there, because until you understand how a TIF works, I don't think you're in a position to really go any further. So I'll share my screen and run you through this is a very shorter version of the kind of presentation that we give to organizations and groups. And as I say, we've done it over 186 times, you know, and that's just here in Chicago, not including Detroit, Paducah, Kentucky, Elgin, you know, Evanston, Olympia Fields, and I could go on and on. But here we go. So I think you can see the screen, TIF 101 briefing. You can see, cool. All right. So this is a presentation that we gave a few months ago, but the data still holds. We always start with a little explanation of who we are. As I say, we're a Black-led 501c3 tax-exempt, community-facing do tank. That's kind of how we describe ourselves. We give a lot of organization. We do a lot of training, and we offer a lot of civic workshops. These are some of them. But this whole thing with TIFs for me started in 2008. So this is the flyer that I distributed when I was operating something called Greater Lincoln Park Democracy for America. And this is a meeting that we held at DePaul University in February of 2008, where the host was, where our guest speaker was the journalist Ben Jaworski. So I certainly recommend you to go to his archives at the Reader and check him out, Ben Jaworski. Anyway, he came and he gave this presentation that really opened my eyes to TIFs. Basically, he was saying your tax bill is lying to you. That was his opener. You know, he's waiving a property tax bill. So he got me involved and I really wanted to learn more, but it really did become operational until the No Game Chicago campaign of 2009. Now, I don't know if you guys were in the city at that point, but you may remember that Mayor Daley went all out to bring the 2016 Olympics to Chicago. And that would have been the 2016 Summer Games. But a group of activists got together. We called ourselves No Game Chicago, and we did our own research to prove that the Olympics are a city killer. A city killer. Now, of course, the University of Chicago was totally behind the Olympic bid, and they bought up multiple properties all across the near South Side, hoping to profit from the Olympics. I don't know if you know that, but the University of Chicago is a terrible neighbor to the Black communities of the South Side and near South Side, and they remain that way. But in those days, they were hoping the Olympics would come to Chicago and they would profit from it. Now, since the Olympics never came, partly due to our work, the University of Chicago was stuck with a lot of properties, and that's why they were pushing the Obama Center. So the University of Chicago was the main organizer that would help locate the Obama Center, either in Washington Park or where it's going to be put in Jackson Park. So they would profit from their properties approximate to the Obama Center. So why do I mention this? Well, because the main reasoning for prosecuting the Olympic bid at that time was that Chicago was broke. So we had no money. So one of the ways that we as anti-Olympic organizers were countering that argument was to try to prove that we weren't broke. And that's how we got into TIFs. We got a hold of all the TIF reports for 2008. This was 164. We added up all the money that was in the TIF accounts. This is something that had never been done before, oddly. And we found, again, this is in the spring of 2009, that there was $1.7 billion sitting in the TIF accounts at that time. So with that, armed with that fact, we hammered and beat up the Olympic bid until it went away, and we caused the Chicago to be ejected in the first round of bidding in Copenhagen, Denmark, in October of 2009. So that's why I got so involved in TIFs, but I couldn't let it go. And we opened the TIF Illumination Project, as I said, in 2013, and we've done these meetings, or we call TIF Illuminations, all over the city. So these are just a few images from the places we've been. We are unpaid organizers. The Civic Lab has no paid staff. As I say, we're working with organizations all over the place. These are just a few of them. STOP is a militant organization on the South Side. I don't know if you've run into them. That could be a group that you might want to interview. South Side Together Organizing for Power. But we are also working with groups like Save Our Southland SOS, that's in Olympia Fields, the southern suburbs, and the Detroit People's Platform, just to name a few groups, all very, very curious about TIFs. You can find a lot of information on our work at tifreports.com. So that's a website that we maintain. And, you know, when we do these public workshops, we often ask people, what are bad decisions that Chicago has made over the last few years involving public dollars? So we're not going to go into that exercise now, but you can imagine people in the communities upset over, you know, things like closing public schools, closing public health centers, mental health centers, the fact that public schools have no nurses, the fact that many public schools have no librarians, the raising of fees in the Chicago Park District, the deterioration of parks in Black communities. All these issues are very present in people's minds when you visit them in their neighborhoods and just ask them, basically, how is the city working for you? And then we ask a sister question, what difference would it make to you if there was abundant public dollars? So it's the opposite of civic scarcity. Now, this again is another piece of pedagogy that I think is important for you at the University of Chicago to understand, since you are, part of the University of Chicago's ecosystem and the business school down there, which worships the market. Now, I'm not assuming that any of you all share that affinity, but you have to understand how powerful the University of Chicago and its teachings are across many bandwidths, including how to even think about public planning. And the result is what we call a neoliberal point of view, which applies the marketplace to government. That is to say that you look at government like business, which we reject utterly. And there's also the concomitant frame of scarcity and austerity. These are common tropes in a neoliberal construct where, as applied to government, in which we, the citizens, are more like looked at more as the consumers or users of revenue and producers of revenue, as opposed to citizens in the civic body together. So when we ask this question, we're asking people to have an expansive mindset, if you will, or a generous thinking in their minds, where what does your community need? Don't worry about the price tag. Don't think about, oh, they told me there's no money, so I have to think in terms of like pennies. I can't really ask a lot, from my government. So I'll just be happy if I can just get through another day. No, we reject that. And we get a lot of great answers from our neighbors when we just say, think liberally about what your community needs. And you can imagine the range of answers that we have received over the years about what's missing. All right, when we move from that kind of conversation, we talk about, well, what are TIFs? And for your information, just for you to know that these are constructs created by cities under state law, right? And one TIF does not bleed into another city. So our TIFs in Chicago don't deal with Evanston, and Evanston TIFs don't touch or bleed into Wilmette, et cetera. So each city or municipality creates and manages its own TIFs within its borders. Overall, they're designed to subsidize some business project in blighted or underserved areas. But right away, again, I encourage you to stop and go no further and ask yourself the question, when is it okay to give public money to a private business? Why is that okay? And don't rush through that. Just because someone says it creates jobs or whatever nonsense they tell you, I encourage you to hold and press pause and ask yourselves, if this is truly a capitalist society, isn't it every man for himself? So you want to build something, build it. You derive profit from your project, good for you. Your project goes with belly up, it fails. So Tom Trusser opens a pizzeria. I make shitty pizza. My business fails. Should Eric bail me out? Do I get to tap Eric's taxes to buy my pizza oven? I mean, when you put it that way, the answer is no, but that's exactly what TIFs do. So anyway, designed for blighted areas. The question is, who blighted who? Again, this is Chicago, and you have to remember that a blighted area didn't blight itself. So Chicago's urban construct is the result of 100 years of racism, segregation, redlining, blockbusting, predatory lending, and other racist practices, some of which the University of Chicago gleefully participated in. So we just can't rush past that. But again, that's the law. The law uses the words blight. But I'm telling you that blight is a loaded term and needs to be interrogated. The other part of TIFs is, well, you got to use the but-for test, which again is a very elastic term, it basically says, if you can show, I mean, you being the developer proposing to receive TIF money, you have to show that the market has fled. That is to say, you can't do this project under normal capitalistic circumstances. In other words, taking a loan out. Basically, that's how development happens, right? Developer puts his own equity into a project and gets a loan, construction loan, and goes off and builds the strip mall or the house or the skyscraper or whatever they build. They derive profit, they pay the loans back, they sell it and they take a profit, or it goes belly up and they take a loss. But in Illinois, the standards of what makes a TIF are so elastic that virtually any spot in this state can be designated a TIF, including LaSalle Street. So I invite you, when you feel comfortable of leaving your houses and going out in the world, go down to LaSalle Street and look around and say, is this a commonplace definition of blight? Look around LaSalle Street, look around the South Loop, look around the West Loop where business is booming. Construction cranes are everywhere. And ask yourself, do we really need to subsidize for-profit construction in this area? And the answer would be no, but TIFs say yes. And I also invite you to go to the site of Lincoln Yards in my community in Lincoln Park, which is Armitage in the River, or the site of the Project 78, which is Roosevelt Avenue in the river, and look around and say, is this a blighted area that requires heavy public subsidy to encourage businesses to develop here? And I would say no, but TIFs say yes. And in the case of Project 78 in the Lincoln Yards, it's $2.4 billion in public subsidies. Okay. So again, as you can see, you can't just jump through these little bullet points. Each of them requires a full stop and some reflection. Now, TIFs, once created, capture the incremental property tax value above the number of property taxes that were created at the start. So we call this the base. We'll get into a second. The next thing you have to remember is TIFs can only be used for hard costs, right? For construction. This is a point that's often overlooked in the discussion of TIFs, but I think it's a key, crucial public policy issue. So in other words, go back to the question that we asked the people in our communities, what's missing to make your community great? A lot of times the answer is manpower. In other words, we need more teachers, we need more librarians, we need more public health nurses. In a time of a pandemic, Blacks and brown people are dying 3 to 4 to 1 over white people. This again is an artifact of baked in racism. So, if the answer to what you need is a person, like I need a librarian, I need a health nurse, I need a coach, I need an artist in residence, I need more teachers or anything like that, TIFs cannot help you. They cannot be used for hiring those people. They're only for building things. And I think there's a political reason for that. And if you're curious, we can talk about it. And the TIFs last for 23 years. And lastly, and most tellingly, TIF money is only supposed to be used where it's collected. Now, this will be, I'm going to argue, one of the single biggest reasons why TIFs are racist. And you may be curious about that. But let's go on. So take a look at a real TIF. This is the Midwest TIF in the 24th Ward, created in 2000. You can see the boundaries are somewhat irregular, and the drawing of these lines is somewhat of a mystery to us. We feel that it has something to do with maybe why the TIF was created in the first place. So if it needs a certain amount of money to get going, and they look at the properties, and this is a Black community, there's a lot of low-lying housing, there's no skyscrapers, right, in this particular community. So it's a little of a mystery of how these boundaries are drawn, but nevertheless, they are drawn. And then what happens is the county will take account of all the properties in the TIF district and calculate how much property tax these properties are generating. So for the sake of this argument, let's just say there are 1,000 properties in this particular TIF when the lines are drawn, okay? And let's say, for the sake of the argument, that these properties are generating $1,000 in property taxes. as the TIF starts. We call this the base. That's really important to remember. And now we're going to come to one of the first policy conundrums that TIFs present us. So you may have seen this little diagram before. The flat blue at the bottom represents the base. That's that $1,000 that our little TIF is throwing off. So that $1,000 is going to the units of government that receive TIF property taxes to operate. And the first thing you notice is that it's flat for 23 years. So I invite you to speculate on what is the impact of that decision alone. Does anybody want to take a jump at that? Just open your mic and just give us your opinion on what is the impact of that.
Of the flat
Yes.
Of the increase, you mean, or of the
that's flat for 23 years?
Yeah, but like that it wouldn't be increasing, that it stay flat, you mean, like within the 23 years?
Yeah.
Oh, I would imagine that that there was no point to the TIF then if it didn't grow.
No, that's the TIF. The TIF could be growing. That's the number in yellow. The light yellow is the postulated growth of inside the TIF boundaries. So that would mean maybe new construction or just the increase in value of properties. So that's what the light yellow represents.
Got it.
But the first policy question that I have is the $1,000 that's going to the units of government in year 0 or year 1 is the same as it is in year 23. What's wrong with that?
Oh, got it. So so they don't get any of the additional revenue.
Correct. So what we see here is the first issue of that I want to put in front of you. So if it's $1,000 here for the units of government, it's the same here 23 years later. That's a generation. Is anything going to cost the same next year, let alone 23 years from now? The value of money? No, of course not. So right away, the first policy conundrum is you're starving units of local government. And let's remind ourselves, shall we, what are those units of local government that rely on property tax? Anybody know what the biggest one is?
CPS, right? I think.
Public schools. Right. So let's take a pause inside of a pause and talk about that for a moment. What is the equity issue that surfaces when public schools rely heavily on property taxes to operate? Or is there an equity issue?
The property values of wealthier communities will funnel larger amounts of funding into public schools.
Exactly. Exactly so. And that is a troublesome issue, is it not? So what you're saying is, if you happen to live in a community that's wealthy, that is to say the houses are more valuable and maybe there's a mall or whatever, and a lot of property taxes being thrown off inside your county, or rather your city or your municipality, your public schools are going to do very well. However, a few miles away in a community that's not so well off, again, it's the opposite. And so you have built-in, baked-in inequities in a situation like that. Now, keeping that in mind, what is the further impact if the state has a regressive income tax?
I'm just going to chime in really quickly.
Go ahead.
And so I have another meeting that I have to hop off to, but I just wanted to say that I appreciate your perspective a lot. And as you sort of said at the top of the call, it's not a perspective that we're often provided at the University of Chicago. And so I wish there was more space for conversations like this, but I just, I thank you for the work that you've been doing, because I know you said this has been like an unpaid long-term effort.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So many thanks there. And I wish I could stay, but I do have to go, but just want to say thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Amanda.
Bye.
Well, as I say, we're videoing this and then we'll post it, and then you can share it as you see fit. But let's get back to the question. if Illinois has a regressive tax system, which it does this not compound the situation that you just mentioned about inequities?
Right.
Well, it does, absolutely. So Illinois has a regressive income tax situation, which means that the state itself is underfunded and therefore places even more pressure on localities to fund public services through property taxes. That is baked in racism. That is baked in inequity, and there's no way around it. And sadly to say, Illinois is one of the worst in America. It's about, depending on what report you look at, we're like the 7th or 8th or 9th worst state. Like the worst one is Mississippi, but we're like right in there in the worst top 10. And it's because of this flat tax that we sadly were not able to change last year. Around the movement to amend the state constitution. All right. So now I think we've seen several really strong policy problems with TIFs, and we haven't even really gotten into the numbers yet. But I think it's important for you to get this, so you can't be snowballed. Because I think a lot of times the conversations I hear people have, they've already concluded that TIFs are virtuous, and they're just talking about how to tinker with it. And I say, no, I'm taking you back to a more basics point of view. All right. So now the way the TIF works is every year we take a look at the property tax values in the TIF and say in year 5 that this little TIF district that was throwing off $1,000 in taxes is now $5,000. What's the delta?
Maybe like the 4,000, the extra, right?
That's right. That's the increment. Do you see this? Does everyone see this? If you don't see it, unmute yourself and ask me to explain it. Because I'm assuming that you can understand what the increment is. So over here in year 20, let's say there's been a good few years and there's been construction and property values have increased in this little TIF, remember that we posited, and say now those properties are throwing off $20,000 in property taxes. What's the delta?
It'd be the 19K, right?
That's right. So that means, and this operation happens every single year. So that money, the increment does not go to the units of government that require them. No, they go to the mayor, which is why we say this TIF money is off the books. It is not part of the budgeting process, which again is another public policy issue. So if you guys at the Harris School believe in good government and government accountability, you cannot be for TIFs because they are not that. They are the opposite of accountability. They're unaccountable. They're completely driven by clout and the whim of those in power. And we will challenge anybody in any forum, which nobody's ever taken us up on it. So nobody from the mayor's office, no alderman, no commissioner of planning, no professor has ever, in the 9 years that I've been doing this work, nobody's challenged any of this stuff that we're telling you. And we were happy to be challenged in any space or place. So these are the units of government that we're talking about. Of course, you correctly identified the public schools as the victim number 1. So in the city of Chicago, public schools are supposed to get 56 cents of every tax dollar, that's property tax dollar that's collected, but there are other victims as well, as you should see. The city of Chicago itself, the county of Cook, our parks, our city colleges, and of course, our public libraries. Now, the thing that the TIF Illumination Project does is we tally up the TIF numbers every year. So I'm going to share with you just some basic numbers. Again, I challenge you to find this anywhere else, in any form, place, or space. You can look until the cows come home. You will not find it, and there's a reason for it, which is, again, another public policy conundrum. Why is this so difficult to get a hold of? But anyway, we're going to share with you so you don't have to do the work. In 2020, Chicago had 136 TIFs. The suburbs of Cook County had another 311. bringing the total to 447 in the county of Cook in 2020. And you can see how the TIFs are connected here in the city of Chicago. And that is because money can move from one TIF to another in a process called porting. So that's a secret inside of a secret. But 30% of all the city of Chicago is in a TIF. That's crazy. And then we use a little humor when we do these presentations. We talk about, the Frankenstein monster. I don't know if you guys like horror movies. I certainly grew up on them. But the legend of the monster is that the scientists created him out of spare parts and was designed to serve mankind. And he said, "Don't worry about it. I got him under control." And then the monster, he bursts his chains, right? He breaks the scientist's neck. He runs out and he sets the village on fire. Oh, well, that's kind of how we characterize as TIFs. They're getting out of control, they're way out of control. 136 active TIFs in 2020. They removed $820 million from the tax rolls. That is to say, that's if you talk about that operation that we were just performing with the increment, the 136 TIFs removed a total of $820 million in 1 year. That is to say, off the books into the slush fund. Okay, they spent $415 million. And since TIFs came to Chicago back in 1986, they removed $10 billion. That's a lot of money to go missing. Now, the biggest thing that the TIF Illumination Project does every year is we reveal to you, to the people of Chicago, how much money is sitting in the TIF accounts. And it's odd that it's left to us, this group of volunteers that don't even have an office, to perform this relatively simple operation. And again, it's a very good question to ask yourself, why is that? Why doesn't the mayor do this? Why doesn't the University of Chicago do this? Why doesn't the Metropolitan Planning Council do this? I mean, they actually have a budget of about $15 million. They certainly could have some staff to perform this simple function. But why does nobody want to touch this? Well, here's the answer to the question of at least how much money are we talking about? At the end of 2020, there was $1.9 billion sitting in the TIF funds, which again, remember, are just property taxes. 1.9 billion. Has anyone heard that number before? The only way you would have heard it is from us. So if you heard the number, it's because someone is quoting our work, because no one else is looking at it. So I think that's an amazing number. I don't know, I'm boggled by it every time I talk about it. It seems to be startling to me, but there you have it. And since TIFs came to Illinois, we're talking about $24 billion across the entire state. So this is a graph of all the TIFs across the entire state. And in 2019, we're talking about 1,400 TIFs across 580 municipalities. 580 municipalities. So it's a big deal. And so I hear someone talking. If they can mute themselves, that would be great. Appreciate it. And then what about the United States? Again, the University of Chicago and other places are big on research, and you want to know the big picture, don't you? Isn't it a good thing to understand, like, how does Illinois shape up, say, to California or New York or South Dakota? Is it different in central states versus more urban states or more rural states or whatever? But the answer is we don't know, because there is no national accounting for TIFs, which again is very curious. But our estimation is 40,000 TIF districts extract $40 billion a year, which why we show the image of the sad child, because that means America's public schools are being deprived of $20 billion every year, which is why we have come out for abolishing TIFs, which you can go to endtifsnow.org and see our reasoning. All right. That is the briefing that I wanted to share with you. I think you have maybe a firmer, shall we say, a context of TIFs, and now please fire away with your questions if you're still awake.
Yeah, no, thank you for that presentation, and Mo, Kelsey, feel free to jump in whenever if you guys have questions. I was curious, like, so we've noticed that a lot of the TIF projects, or like, I don't know what the history was before, like a decade ago, right? But it seems like a lot of the TIF money is being spent on public infrastructure. So like, like parks, roads, etc. I'm curious if it's always been like that, or has it gone to private developers in the past? And
yes.
I'm sorry, and if community residents wanted money to be spent on roads and infrastructure and etc., things that they can access, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on do you think, I mean, I think I can guess like that TIFs might not be the right tool, right? But I'm just kind of curious to kind of just,
well, TIF defenders will say that, but that's only over the last few years. The TIF program has funded billions of dollars to private developers in the Loop and West Loop and South Loop to this very day. I mean, there's 2 super TIFs for Project 78 and Lincoln Yards make that statement a lie. So yes, TIF money is used for a park here and a school there, but it's completely dwarfed by the billions upon billions that have gone to private developers. And remember, private developers in turn make campaign contributions to the mayor and aldermen. So this is a corrupting process. There's no way around it. And I'm sorry, but you can't forget Chicago is the most corrupt city in America. Unless you keep that in your heart, your studies are for nothing, because you're going to be told nothing but lies. So yes, partly because of our criticism, TIFs have been somewhat made more circumspect, but still to this day, the South Loop, the West Loop, and the Central Loop are TIFed. And so if you wanted to say, well, only let's put a TIF in a community, say, where 51% of the children are on the school lunch program. So that's that would be a definition of poverty and need. You could say that would make most of the TIFs blink out of existence immediately. Now, your second part of the question is, well, what about public infrastructure, like roads or a firehouse or a school? And this is where we get confused. It's not the TIF's job to build that. That's not what TIFs were created for. They were created to create economic development, and building a firehouse doesn't produce any economic development because it doesn't produce more property taxes. But they'll say, but look, if you have a good school or a good park, that makes a community more attractive. So maybe that makes it more desirable to invest in. And so that's their logic, but that's not why TIFs were created. And again, it queers the planning process. Again, we're calling out TIFs as racist and corrupting. And this, again, I would say is a point in our favor. So if you ask your colleagues in planning, in city planning or urban planning at the University of Chicago, and ask them, well, what does a great public planning process look like for a city? Like, you sit back and think like, well, where should our parks go, right? That's a good question for planners about urban space making, but also equity and service, and amenities, and, so that's a good question. Chicago has X number of parks. By the way, we're very unparked. We're like 50% of the open lands that we should have, according to Open Lands and the National Trust for Public Parks. Daniel Burnham, 100 years ago, said that we should have 10 acres per 1,000 people, and we're not even at 50% of that. So you could say, objectively, Chicago is underparked, but not everywhere. So who gets to have the next park? See, in a planning process that you might have, with some equity and justice, you might say, well, can we not see where all the children are? So where are the children under 5? And make that a heat map, and then overlay it on where the parks are, and then do some other kind of manipulation to say, well, where are the communities that have to walk more than 20 minutes to get to a park? or 30 minutes, and then make that a heat map. And then overlay that with Black and brown demographics or household wealth. And pretty soon you're going to see a kind of a pattern that's very repetitive in Chicago. You're going to see places of wealth and privilege on the north side have everything they need. They're going to have good parks. Their lifespan and household wealth statistics will be good and elevated. Their lifespans will be high. And the opposite will be true for Black and brown communities over and over again. So back to this mythical planning process. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that in order to correct these injustices, the next 15 parks that we build shall all be in underparked communities of color in which there are many new children. And that's what I would call a justice-guided policy process. And you can explain that to the whole city, and I, in wealthy white Lincoln Park, would go, you've made a good point, Mayor Eric. I understand what you're saying. My property taxes are going into the pot, and you're going to build 15 parks, and none of them will be by me, because I've got mine, and I am okay with that, Mayor Eric. You may proceed, and I am happy to have my property taxes go into that pot, as everybody's will be doing so. And maybe the 16th park that you build might be by me, but that's open and above board, you know what I'm saying? And that is a good use of our collective money. That is not TIF. It's the opposite of TIFs. So the third part of your question would be this. If you are using public TIF money to build a school or expand, say, improve a subway stop, you're de facto saying it can only be done in a wealthy community where the TIF is flush. Because if you put a TIF on a poor community, by my earlier presentation, the TIF, that delta, is flat. And therefore the TIF cannot fill up with good money. And it's a lie. It's actually the opposite of what it's presented to be. So if you're in a poor community or a community that's just doing modestly well and the property taxes are not rising, and somebody says to you, we're going to put a TIF on you, and that's how you're going to get better, that's bullshit. Now we get to one of our central arguments of why TIFs are racist. And let's see if we can follow this. If a community is wealthy and has a TIF, the money stays there, right? It can only move to the TIF that's nearest, but it can't go any further. If the TIF is in a community that's poor, the delta is very small, and sometimes it's flat or even goes below ground, doesn't it? We know there's a lot of houses in Black and brown communities that are underwater. So I hope you know that Chicago has the most homes underwater in America, right? And again, it's not by accident. The University of Chicago looks on with complete indifference as their neighbors lost their homes. Anyway, if you put a TIF in that space, the TIF is going to falter and hump and stumble. It's nothing to be. So it is anti-distributional. Okay. Progressive economics calls for redistribution of wealth. That's what a progressive income tax is. That's why America has a graduated income tax. The Constitution was amended in 1913. Before 1913, a billionaire paid nothing. In a situation where there's a flat tax, like we had for Illinois, the billionaire pays the same rate of tax as their janitor or their maid or their dog walker. That's racist. That's unjust, you see. The TIFs fall into that category, and it's crucial that you see this point. You may not agree with it, but you have to see that TIFs are anti-distributional and therefore part of a racist history of policy in Chicago. Does that make sense, or do you dispute my conclusion?
No, that makes sense, and I have like a follow-up question to that. So based on your presentation and based on what I've kind of heard, so it seems like if you have a TIF district in an area, the money could be transferred to the neighboring districts, but not to a north side TIF district can't transfer its its revenue to a South Side TIF
Correct.
district.
Correct.
If there was a change in the policy that allowed for, let's say, like downtown TIF districts that you could transfer their additional revenue to other under-resourced neighborhoods, do you think that would be a better system, or would that still be?
Well, that is a very interesting question, and we call that hopscotching. So instead of porting from contiguous TIFs, you're hopscotching, like you say, way over geography. Well, that just makes a shitty situation somewhat more palatable, but why bother? You're still giving the mayor control over this slush fund. Why not just say to the people of Chicago, what do you need here? And again, I ask you to challenge these notions of what does development look like? See, our work posits these questions, and I will repeat them for you. The first is, as I mentioned already, under what circumstances do you give public money to a private individual? You have to at least ask that question. The second is, what does it mean to have a developed community? So anytime somebody tells you this is for development, again, you've got to stop them and ask them to define themselves. What does it mean to be developed? Again, this structure talks about physical things, building stuff, a Starbucks, a housing project. But I ask you to take a look at the conditions on the ground. People don't need another Starbucks. They don't need a mega complex on Lincoln Yards. They need healthcare. They need, you know, our classes are overcrowded in many schools. 30, 40, 50, 40 kids learning in the broom closets. The schools are filthy and rat infested because the mayor has outsourced the janitorial services to Sodexo Magic Sodexo, Magic Johnson's company. Magic Johnson gave Mayor Emanuel $500,000 campaign contribution. In return, he got a $200 million contract, which he did not fulfill. He should be thrown in jail. So when you ask people, what does development look like? They're not going to say, boy, I think we need another, you know, high-end retail. Fucking stores are empty. Go up and down, go into my community. Lincoln Park is one of the wealthiest communities in Chicago. There are empty storefronts everywhere. People are buying on the internet. After the global pandemic, we need less office space, not more. But again, you have to question these concepts. So what does a developed community look like? It's never asked, okay? And you never ask the people. Okay, that's the second one. The third one is, who gets to plan what for who? And you have to ask yourself, who is the author of these plans and who is profiting from them? If you don't answer that and don't know that, then you're getting the wool pull over your eyes, because people are making a lot of money from these plans, right? There's a TIF construction complex. So there's consultants, they're bankers, they're lawyers, the developers, of course, are making beaucoup money. So when someone comes up with a plan to redevelop, you know, whatever it's called, Lincoln Yards or Project 78, these are billionaires, you know, deciding to play Monopoly with the city, and you know, and they're using our money to do it. And lastly, who's watching our backs? And I ask it again with a critical point of view, is what does a leader look like? To me, a leader is someone who watches our backs and protects our interests, not sells us out and robs us on a daily basis. That's not a leader. Again, as you can see, we're pretty critique, and we're pretty brutal, which is why we never get invited to any of these spaces. So you'll never see. I mean, you sought me out, but I will never be invited to the University of Chicago to lecture. I will never be invited into your School of Public Policy as a visiting professor or a lecturer. They will never invite me in there. But we have sought entrance. We have sought those spaces. At the Institute of Politics, that was controlled by David Axelrod, for example, we tried to get in there. Okay, so those are the key questions that I hope that they will stay with you and inform your future inquiries.
No, I genuinely appreciate that. Like we are hearing that from community organizations who they see it as, so the thing that stood out to me is they see it as they see TIFs as a downtown development tool. They didn't even think about it being used to help their neighborhoods. You know what I mean? Like that's the way they view it from the get-go. And that's information that's useful to know, honestly, because we're trying to see it, at least we're trying to hear what different parties are saying, and
well, I mean, I would say we've been challenged. Okay, Tom, you're so negative. What's the replacement for TIFs? And again, the conversation has been presented that it's TIFs or nothing. Again, which is just patently false. But if you're asking, if that's something that will recur, we just remind you that people are thinking so narrowly. They've been trained to just be happy with crumbs. We're saying we sweep that away and just say, what if there was a $20 billion reparations project that was aimed at hiring 200,000 teenagers of color for 6 months to do whatever, community gardening, mentoring, delivering a second round of mail? I don't know. What if the city of Chicago built a factory in the poorest community to build light rail cars? I mean, so now we're talking about the New Deal. See, we're completely flipping the neoliberal construct on its head, and we embrace, as you can guess, big government, thinking boldly for the people, not raping the people, which is the exact opposite of where Chicago's mindset is. This is a marketplace. This is the financialization capital of America. We make money on money. Our parking meters, our tickets, these things are all designed to extract resources from the poorest people. It's the wrong way to raise money in the city of Chicago. But we say no. We say tax wealth, not labor, which sounds socialistic, I suppose, right? We say think big and go bold, like they used to do in the days of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So why not build a light rail car factory in the South Side owned by the city of Chicago, and turning out buses or electric buses to be used by the CTA, cut the fare in half, send the buses between the poorest parts of the community and where the jobs are, wherever they are in the suburbs, train people from the city of Chicago to build those buses, to operate the fleet, and to do other kinds of programming, so that it's an entirely virtuous circle of money, because the city does buy, obviously, buses and rail cars, but we bought them from China. So China did set up a factory on the South Side, but essentially, when we spent $8 billion on those CTA cars, we essentially sent most of that money to China, and some of it stopped off in Paris, where the company's headquartered, and a little bit of it stayed in Chicago. Well, what if all $8 billion stayed completely in Chicago? And we hired, 4,000 people, triple shifts, working around the clock to build these light rail cars. After they supplied the CTA fleet, we sell them the remaining excess capacity of this plant at cost to other cities around America. So San Jose needs 15 light rail cars. We sell them at cost. And that will never go out of style. Will never not work. You know what I mean? But that's completely the opposite thinking of the way we run the city. No one will ever propose such a scheme. You know what I'm saying? They keep looking to the private sector, for the answers, and it's not there. It cannot be there.
Mm-hmm. There was one other topic I wanted to touch on around not so much on like ways to improve TIFs or anything like that, or I guess it would be more, but it's more on the transparency side. So we've heard that, I'm curious to hear your opinion on this, that the transparency, there has been more info being put out in the public. At least that's the perception. That's what people are saying, that we've talked to, especially during the Lightfoot administration. I'm curious to hear, do you think that's true? And two, if not, or even if you do think it's true, what other suggestions do you have to make it more to make the information more public?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've thought a lot about it, but I'll give you my first answer, but blunt answer is, again, this is the most corrupt city in America. So when we hear conversations that use the word transparency, it's like we should have a drinking game. Whenever we hear those conversations in public that Chicago is more transparent, everybody should take a shot. And you're going to get so drunk, you're going to fall over, in 15 minutes. So transparency in cities like Chicago is akin to watching the security footage from a gasoline station robbery 3 weeks after the crime has been committed. So what you see is grainy footage of a guy with a gun and someone going with his hands up, taking money out of the register. So the crime has been committed, but the criminal is long gone. That's transparency in the city of Chicago. The best we can do is just after the crime has been committed, we can get a sense of how bad the crime was. So I challenge you, again, this is a challenge I've given to many journalists and nobody's ever taken us up on it, but this would be a kind of an interesting sidebar conversation for you and your colleagues to go to the TIF portal. And there's multiple versions of it. The city of Chicago maintains one. The Cook County clerk maintains one. And and the Inspector General of the city of Chicago also maintains one. So 3 places where there's lots of data. I defy you to go there and come up with a TIF report for one ward. So pick a ward at random, pick the ward with the University of Chicago's in. I think it's the 4th ward, and see how long, or if you can determine how many TIFs are in the 4th ward, how much money they've taken in 2020, how much money they've taken since TIFs came, what projects were funded by TIFs, who owned those projects, if money was transferred inside those TIFs, like I say, the ones that touch. If any of those TIFs are carrying debt, ooh, that's an interesting point. What if they were? Well, we know the answer to all those questions. And also, can you determine if the Department of Planning is skimming? Ooh, are they stealing money from inside the steal? That is to say, there's a shell game inside of a shell game. And if so, how much money is the Department of Planning skimming from the TIFs of the 4th ward? If you can do that, if you can come back to me, and I'll give you 30 days. And if you can come back to me, I'll give you $100 out of my own pocket. And you can't use my own work though. you could probably find it somewhere and just quote me my own work. But if you can do it on yourself, by yourself, I'll give you $100, right? But I know that's a safe bet. You'll never be able to do it. So the answer is you cannot reform a racist policy. I don't care how transparent slaveholding was. Hey, here's how many slaves we have in Alabama. Here's how old the slaves are. Here's how many died. Here's how many babies here's how many men and women, and here's the trades that the slave, these guys are inside the house, or these guys are field slaves. I'm for all more information, but you're not going to be able to determine, for one thing, TIFs by wards. That's just not possible because they don't want you to know. And they're also going to be it's going to be very hard to get that big number at the end of the year, how much money was sitting in the TIF accounts. Let alone these other more qualitative questions that we're bringing to the party.
Like do people feel like it improved their way of life and their community and et cetera, right? Yeah.
Like I say, TIFs, again, we have the numbers to back us up, but we can tell you that in the 42nd ward, which is the Loop, there's about 40 projects that received almost $500 million of TIF money. And these are high-rise, office buildings, many of which were flipped, since they received the TIF money. So meanwhile, while all this has been happening, all this narrative that I've been telling you, at the same time, our public schools limp along, our public health has limped along, and you can't disassociate one from the other. While you're, like I said, almost $800 million in 1 year, it adds up. As I mentioned, $10 billion since TIFs came to Chicago in 1985. Imagine what we could have been like, what public life could have been like in Chicago if that $10 billion had been more properly spent and not spent on development. You know, you let the high rises, you know, again, TIF defenders will tell you that was money well spent, because otherwise the loop would be a shithole. You know, it would be like Skid Row, you know, but the scholars will say you are mistaking coincidence for causality. Unfortunately, we don't have a time machine. We can't go back to 1986, cancel TIFs, and then fast forward to 2022 and just take a look at the city of Chicago and go, you see, Tom was right. The city looks great. Or no, Tom and his TIF people were completely wrong. The city is a big shithole. We needed those. You can't do that. But what the academics have done is statistical work to approximate that. And what they say is the presence of TIFs is a wash. In city after city they look at, in many cases, it's a negative, it's a depressant. So the scholars tell me, and this is not Tom talking, these are the scholars, they're saying TIFs have nothing to do with economic development. What the hell? What? That's why they're sold to us. What they really are, again, this is policy talk. TIFs are hidden taxation, hidden financing, hidden governance, and hidden debt. Stressing the word hidden. So that's not a conversation that anybody from the Department of Planning is going to tell you. Hey, we're in the hidden debt business. You know, we have nothing to do with economic development. We're just hiding a bunch of debt. You know, we're keeping all this financing away from public eye. No, they would not agree to that characterization, but that's how we come at it.
Well, Tom, this was honestly really insightful. I don't think we got this level of information around TIFs with the other organizations, and there's two small nonprofits that specifically told us to contact you. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And Kelsey, I as long as it's okay with you, Tom, Kelsey, I'm wondering if you had any questions or
maybe just quickly, like, could you reiterate why you think like a but-for analysis wouldn't help the TIF funding? Because I know you were saying that like TIF in itself is racist and like the policy itself. And so is that part of the explanation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just language that consultants use to justify sending money to private interests that don't deserve public money. So if you go to where the Lincoln Yards site is, or the Project 78 site is, you can find evidence like, well, there used to be a factory here. There's not a factory. Is that blight? If you say it is, but it's the hottest real estate market.
Stop yelling, Tom.
In Chicago, right? So does Sterling Bay, and Sterling Bay is the developer, and we have to remind you that Sterling Bay is co-owned by a billionaire, a Crown, and his grandfather Lester Crown, you know, is a billionaire industrialist. So a billionaire is building a multi-billion-dollar project in Lincoln Park and has secured over $2 billion in subsidies for his project. He satisfied the but-for clause. That's BS. Now, we happen to know that the consultant that did the TIF report for the city was hired and was blessed by Lincoln Yards. So the developers got to write their own report. And they rushed it through city council, as you may remember, in April of 2019, because the new assessments were coming. And if they had to operate under the new assessment, the base would have been super high because of the fact that it's now owned by Sterling Bay. So they were going on the old pre-development assessment. So that means that as Lincoln Yards is constructed, and I think there's one building under construction, every penny will be captured by the TIF, where if they had waited 1 month, it would have been a much different story. So again, corrupt. Now, if you want to get into more robust conversations about what should a city do? What is the proper role of a city in economic development? That's a great conversation for another day. And I encourage you to ask yourself that question, or let me set it up for you. The way I would put it is this: what is the sorts of activities that only a city or a government can do, that private industry has no business doing, and which will have the greatest impact on the greatest number of people for their prosperity, health, and well-being? And what are those functions? And those functions, once you come to a conclusion, that's where you push your money, right? Let the private market take care of itself. So back to this scenario of going back to 1986, Chicago and many urban centers are enjoying a great rebirth across America as baby boomer parents are moving back into the urban center, and tech centers and other things are making urban spaces more palatable. This is a trend across the world, not just here. So the market has these cycles that is making investment in a place like Chicago desirable and doesn't need a TIF. You know what I'm saying? So these are some of these larger issues that you should put on the table when you're sorting all this out. Is that helpful?
Same in my end. But honestly, Tom, this was really helpful.